All right, I'm going to show you how to put on your iron-on fusible interfacing if you're choosing that option for your stuffed toy. Today I'm using the Pellon Fusible Featherweight. It works great. There's lots of great options out there, so if you have a lightweight iron-on interfacing, you're probably good. Don't feel like you have to go pick out the brand that I'm using, but I just wanted to show that in case anybody had a question of what would work. And I've gone ahead and I've cut out each of my pattern pieces. So this is my head in fabric and in my interfacing, and I'm just going to line them up and iron them on. Another great option if you're in a hurry and you have a little bit of excess material, before you cut anything out, you can iron on a whole sheet of interfacing onto all of, like, a whole chunk of fabric, and then cut everything out at once. That's an awesome option if you're in a hurry. It does, at least when I do it, it ends up using up a lot more material. So I usually, just to save material, I cut it out both ways. But if I am in a hurry, I definitely do it that way because sometimes time is more important to me. So I'm just going to go ahead and press these. You want to make sure that you don't move them too much so they don't slide around. And you'll know they're done when they cool if they don't fall off of each other and if they're connected. And if you didn't connect them enough, just go ahead and go on them one time over with the iron. And then you'll just go ahead and use them as normal fabric pieces. Or I have the belly and the head pieces, and we're going to begin by sewing in a dart. If you've never sewn in a dart, when you look at the pattern pieces, you'll see there is a solid line and dotted lines. And we're going to draw those lines onto our pattern piece. And then, once they're onto our pattern piece, we'll fold the fabric in half on the solid line, and you'll just sew once on the dotted line, and that will make your dart. But you have to do it on fabric, of course. So to transfer it on, you'll need a removable marking pen. I like these friction pens, or friction pens, however you say it, I don't know. And on the back, so this is the right side of my fabric, this is the back. I've got the interfacing already ironed on there. I'm going to transfer where the dot is. And then this one, the lines go into the corners like that. So I'll mark it on the corners. And then you can draw, kind of connect the dots like this. Oh, and I forgot to put in my middle dot. And then you have your solid line dot there. So that middle one is where you're going to fold your fabric. And you're going to go ahead and mark all 4 darts on both pieces. All right, I've got my head and my belly pieces, and they're all marked for the darts. I'm going to go ahead and fold on that center line, and I'm going to start sewing here. And when you sew at this end of the dart, be sure that you do a back stitch or like a knot so it doesn't come undone. And because it's a children's toy, I try to just back stitch any time that I finish a seam. So I'm going to go ahead, back stitch, and then just sew right along that trace line. And I'm going to continue to do that on my last 3 darts. All right, I've got my head and my belly piece all darted and pressed. Now I'm going to trim the darts that I just made so that the seam allowance is about 1/4 inch. And you don't have to be exact, just make sure you don't cut your seam because that would be sad, you'd have to resew it. And that just makes it so it's less bulky when you put everything together. You'll notice that there is a side on each of these pieces that comes to a point, and there's a side that's kind of a fatter side. You're going to take both of the fatter sides, line them up together, and sew them together. So then you have a piece that looks like this. And once you have this, I'm just going to go ahead and I am going to iron the seam. All right, now that I've got the head and the body all ironed, I'm going to take one side of my body piece. Oh, sorry, head and the belly. This is the body piece. And you'll notice on the pattern, there's a star right there. You'll want to take your removable marking pen and mark that star on the back side of your body piece. So that's my front side, this is my back side, and I just marked where that star is. And that star is going to tell us where to place this piece. So you always want to put right sides together like this, and you want to take this middle seam that you just sewed and you want to line it up with that mark. So there's the mark and there's the seam. You're going to put a pin right there. And from there, you're going to go ahead and just pin the edge of the belly and the head to the body piece. All right, and that's what it looks like. You can see it kind of poofs up. And I'm going to pull my sewing machine up, and we're just going to sew right along the edge of the head and the belly, right where we pinned it. And on this, because you're fitting pieces to make them three-dimensional, I like to keep my needle so it automatically goes down. That way, as you go around turns, you'll see in a second, like right here, I want to just adjust my fabric. Since my needle's down, I can lift my foot and I can adjust the fabric so it doesn't bunch. And that's kind of the key here, is just to have patience and just allow yourself to take a second and put the fabric where it needs to go. It's not too hard, you just have to keep watching it. And as always, when I'm done with this seam, I'm gonna fold it right side out, make sure everything looks okay, and then I'm gonna press it in place. All right, I got my seam pressed. I'm gonna turn it back, wrong side out, and I have my second body piece. I'm going to go ahead, and I've got this marked where the star was. I'm gonna go ahead and line that up with the seam again, just like before. Put a pin in it, and just like before, I'm gonna go around and I'm gonna take the edge of this head, well, this side of the body piece, and pin it around the head and the belly. And I like to make sure when I'm doing this that that these edges are lining up. You don't have to pin them yet, but you want it just to make sure everything's in the right spot. I always like to double check. All right, everything's looking good. I'm going to go ahead and sew from right where this connects, so right there onto this new seam and all the way on down to the end of the tail. And right in the middle, I'm going to stop probably about right here, and I'm going to do back stitch, and then I'm going to leave it open right here for about 3 fingers width to right here. I'll start again with the back stitch, and then I'll sew over here. That will leave us a place to put the stuffing once we have everything all done. All right, let's go and sew. I think I'm going to actually start at the bottom. Alright, this is where I'm going to put in my stuffing, so I'm going to back stitch. I'm going to take the whole thing off, cut the thread. I'm going to start 3 fingers width down. Giving yourself 3 fingers width just gives you enough room that you can put the stuffing in. So it's not a real technical measurement, but it's nice to have. Alright, in a minute I'm going to be able to sew this whole thing closed, but since those are kind of tricky seams, I like to put it right side out and just make sure, so I missed something right there because that's where I'm going to stuff. But I want to make sure I didn't miss anywhere else because it'll be so annoying to have to, like if you start stuffing it and see a hole, to have to undo everything. Everything is looking good. I'm going to go press this and then I'll sew the back together. Alright, I've got my seams pressed as much as I can. It's kind of hard to get in there, so you just kind of do what you can. And you can finger press too. If you don't know what that is, you just, I mean, it is just what it sounds like. You just kind of pull the seam together and just kind of try to flatten it out with your fingers. And that is a lot easier to do around these curvy parts. I'm going to turn it back inside out. And this time, I'm going to sew from where I stopped on the top of the head all the way down to the bottom of the tail. And you don't have to leave an opening because we already have for stuffing. Alright, I've got my whole dinosaur sewn. I'm gonna turn it right side out and move on to the arms and the legs. And I just want to show you how I put the poly pellets or the plastic pellets in. Just so you know, this is one type of brand that you can look for those. I know sometimes they're hard to find, so we have a link to where you can find them online on our website if you have a hard time finding them in stores. And to put them in the dinosaur, I really like to have them in this guy because he stands up and he has such a big nose that he needs a little bit of weight down here so he stands up a little better. I like to put mine in a funnel like this, and this funnel is great because it has this stop that you lift up, so it's already full of pellets, and you can just lift up the stop when you're ready to put them in. So just go ahead and do that. I put in I never measure exactly how many I put in. I do it more by feel, but I put in maybe a tablespoon and then I use my finger to just, let's see if you can see that a little better, shove it down into the tail. So that's not better for you at all. Here we go. That kind of shows you what I'm doing. And I'll do that with probably 2 tablespoons of the pellets. So I'll do that one more time, just to get some weight in there, and then I'll go ahead and fill the rest of her little belly. And that, yeah, I don't know, I probably use a total of 4 or 5 tablespoons, but I usually just feel it, and when it's the weight that I like it, I stop. So it doesn't really matter. You can't really put in too few or too many. So whatever you like or whatever you have on hand works great. Alright, I've got my dinosaur all full of poly pellets, and because I have to hand sew this opening closed and there's all these little tiny pellets that I need to stay in there, I like to take one more piece of stuffing, probably not that big, and I just stuff it over the pellets. And that makes it so that while you're sewing they don't fall out. And also because hand sewing comes undone faster than machine sewing. If by chance your seam rips apart, hopefully all the poly pellets won't spray out immediately, at least. And now I'm going to go ahead and sew this by hand. I'm just going to show you guys how to do a ladder stitch so you can sew these closed with an invisible stitch. So I have my thread, I have my thread doubled and knotted, and I'm going to go ahead and bring, there's a poly pellet, stray one, bring my needle through the folded piece of material. I'm trying to make sure this is close enough that you guys can see it. Alright, and you'll see, notice how these are both folded. They just kind of go on the natural fold where the seams were. And so I start on the left. I'm going to just pick up a piece on the right and I'm going to work down and pull it. And then I'm just going to pick up a piece on the left and pull it. And I'll just continue on like that. And you'll see how that's closing that with an invisible stitch. There you go. And when I get all the way down, I'm going to tie off 3 times, and then I'm actually going to do it back up again because this is a children's toy, and that way you kind of have a double chance of it not breaking open. Okay, I've sewn my hook closed. I knotted it and I sewed it back closed again just because I'm paranoid and I don't want these little poly pellets to come out. And I've got my string attached, and I don't want to just cut it here and have a loose string. So, oh, I have it knotted already. So I'm going to show you how to sink your thread. So I've got my knot, it's right here, it's kind of hard to see because the thread matches. I'm going to put my needle, which is threaded with the thread still, put it right down next to that knot. And I'm just going to pull it up anywhere, it doesn't really matter. When we pull it through, you'll see that the thread is now inside of the dinosaur. So I can clip it right here, and then the tail is in the inside of the dinosaur and it won't poke out and annoy you. So that is how you sink your thread. Alright, I'm ready to sew my arms. I just have 2 pieces. I'm going to put right sides together, and I'm going to sew from here all the way around to here, leaving an opening on the top for turning and stuffing. Alright, I'm ready to sew my last bit. I'm going to sew these feet, put them right sides together, and I'm going to sew right along the top. Don't sew the bottom yet. Alright, we've got our feet, the tops of our feet all sewn together, so it goes like that. We're not going to turn it right side out yet, we're going to put the bottom of the foot on. So, what you need to do is fit this circle right there to this circle. And if you're comfortable doing that, you can just go ahead and go around the circle and leave a little hole for turning and stuffing. If you're not comfortable doing that, if that sounds a little scary or annoying, mostly it sounds annoying to me, I'm going to show you a little trick to make the top of the foot fit a little bit better onto the bottom of the foot. You're going to take your sewing machine and you're going to adjust the length of your stitches to a really long stitch. On mine, I just turn it up for as long as the stitch will go. That's going to create a gathering stitch. And I want you're just going to put the bottom of the foot down for a second and not worry about it. You're going to sew that gathering stitch right along this foot, probably about 3/8 of an inch up, a little bit more than your normal seam allowance. And you'll just go around and you'll stop before it starts so you don't sew you don't sew the ending of the stitch onto the top of the stitch. I'll show you what I mean in a sec. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. And again, I'm going to work with my needle down, so it always goes down, because as you can see, this is a little piece, and I like to have the freedom, there we go, I like to have the freedom of putting up my foot and just adjusting where my fabric is, and then working again through it. And this stitch does not need to be pretty, we're going to pull it out afterwards. It's just going to help you get a shape. Alright. Okay. I've started, I've stopped before it started, so if you can see, I probably should have used a different color thread, but this is where it started, this seam, this thread, and this is where it stopped, way over here. So you've got a little bit of a difference. And I'm going to go ahead and you're going to pull just one thread. So there's the thread on the top and there's the thread on the bottom of each seam, and you're just going to pull the one. For me, it's the one on the top. It depends how you adjust. It might be the one on the bottom, depending on how you sewed your foot. But you're going to pull it just a little bit, and as you pull it, you'll start gathering the foot. You don't want to gather it a ton, just a little bit. And you'll see, as I'm gathering it, see how the bottom is starting to turn down, to turn under, I guess. That is going to be awesome, because now we can just take that part that's turning under and we just place it on that foot, and suddenly it's so much easier to just sew that flat part. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to do that. And I like to start, so there's, on this, there's a lot of curves, but then there's these two straight sides. Those straight sides are a lot easier to hand sew, so that's where I like to keep my opening for turning. So I'm going to start here and sew around and end there and leave that opening for turning. So I'll just line up the back of the foot with one of the curved sides. Doesn't matter which one because they're symmetrical. And I'm going to go ahead and start sewing. Again, needle down, because this requires a lot of stopping and adjusting, for me at least. Oh, and make sure you turn your seam allowance down, or your seam length down, so that you're doing a normal seam now. And as I need to turn, I'll just adjust it, but it's easy. It's fitting real easy because I've got those gathering stitches. And I'll just adjust again. All right. I'm just going to go ahead and trim all of these crazy threads. I'll turn this around and show you from there. Just a little trick. Since these little pieces are hard to turn, I like to have a chopstick on hand, and I love the ones that have the paint on them because they're nice and smooth so the wood won't catch on your fabric and snag it. And I like to just, I use the fat end to turn, and you can kind of just wiggle it through like that. If you use the skinny end, it'll poke through your fabric, so be careful. But I just get it started with that. I've got it all turned right side out. Now I'm going to use my chopstick. I'm still using the bigger end just to spread out all the seams. And then what you can do is use your little end, and carefully, so you don't poke anything out, you can get all of those corners nice and poked right. Now, if you did my trick to help put the bottom of the foot on with the gathering foot, you're going to have the seam here, and you just want to rip that out now. You don't need it anymore. So you might want to take like a little pair of scissors and just cut the thread there, and then you can just, if you just cut it like halfway through, or if it's getting caught, you can cut it again and just pull it on out, and then no one will ever know you did it. Alright, I've got all of my pieces stuffed, and I'm getting ready to sew on my button joints. Doing button joints is a lot easier with buttons that have two holes. You'll see why in a minute. That being said, you can't mess up using a 4-hole button. I'm just going to show you how to make it a little easier. So take your 4-hole button, and before we sew anything, I'm going to sew anything onto the dinosaur. I'm going to take this 4-hole button with the thread that I'm going to use for my button joints, and I'm going to go and I'm going to take it, I have it doubled, I'm going to take it down and fill these 2 holes, just the 2 diagonal holes. And I'm going to turn the button over and tie a square knot. And actually I'll probably put a third one in there, just in case. And then I'll go ahead and just clip down those ends so they don't show through the front of the button. Now you'll see that we've essentially taken our 4-hold button and we've filled 2 of the holes so that now we only have to fill 2 more. So we've essentially made ourselves a 2-hold button. And we can go ahead and sew on our button joints now. All right, it's time to sew on our button joints. I have an example done for you, the arms. This will allow your arms and legs to move, which is a really fun option. We're gonna go ahead and put on the legs. I'm gonna start with some embroidery floss, just the regular 6-stranded embroidery floss. I'm using the whole thing and I'm using it doubled. And I do not have a knot at the end. I'm gonna take my legs and figure out where I want them. And this is an important part. Like, a lot of the cuteness of your final dinosaur is gonna be dependent upon where you put the arms, legs, and eyes. So don't be afraid to just take a minute and figure out where you like them. Move them around, see what you like. I personally tend to like them pretty far back on the body. And just high enough so that she can sit. So I like to try that out and make sure that they're not messing with the arms too much. This looks okay. So this is looking pretty good for me. So I'm gonna leave this one on here and I'm gonna take a button so I know where to put my needle through. So that's where I want the button in the final part. We don't actually sew this button on now. We're just using it for a placement so I know where to put my needle. So I know that eventually I want the thread to go right behind that button right there. So I'm gonna put my needle through, I'm gonna mark it, I like to keep my thumb there so I remember, but you can kind of see the little hole. And that's the hole I'm gonna go through. And I'm gonna just kind of squeeze the dinosaur so that my needle can go all the way through, and I'm gonna put the needle all the way through to the other side. And you want to look at him from all angles once it's through, like from the top, and make sure that it's even. And that's looking pretty even to me. So we have the tail end and the needle end. We're gonna make the tail about that long, just long enough so you don't accidentally pull it through. And we're gonna work on the end with the needle. I'm gonna take my other foot and a button. And this is the button that was a 4-hold button, but because 4-hold buttons are so annoying, I threaded that thread through and then I tied it on the back. And I'm just not gonna use those holes right now. I'm gonna use the empty holes. So I'll put them on the top, the empty holes on the top and bottom. I'll bring my needle in through the top one and down through the bottom one. And I'm gonna pull it tight. And the reason you don't want to use all 4 holes is because it's just harder to pull it tight. You can do it, but it's just kind of annoying. But since I had that threaded before, it looks like I did all 4 right now, but we still have the mobility in our thread of 2 holes, which is great. So now I've got my thread going through the leg. I'm gonna pass it through the dinosaur again. So right next to, but not in the same hole, but next to, let's see how close I can get it so you can see. There, so that's where my thread came through. I'm gonna do it just right next to it. And I'm gonna squeeze the dino again, and I'm gonna bring it right next to the place where I did it before. And sometimes you gotta poke a couple times to figure out where you're going. There we go. And if you don't want to, if you don't want to have to squeeze the dino like that, you can just use a longer needle. But I didn't have one, and I hate having to make an extra trip to the store, so I didn't. All right, now we're gonna put on our last leg. I'm gonna get it ready with the button on top so I can hold it together like that. And this one, because where my needle is attached is on the bottom, and where it went through at the beginning is kind of at the top, I'm gonna go through the bottom hole first. If you mess that up, it doesn't really matter. But so you'll go through the bottom and then the top, and then you have your tails from where you started and your thread coming through this leg. And you're gonna tie those two just in a normal knot, like when you start to tie your shoe. And you're gonna pull them tight. And the tightness is also important to the cuteness factor. So before you do your double knot, I want you to just kind of look at your dino and see how tight it is. If they're too tight, here, I'll do it too tight for you. If they're too tight, it looks all squished and it starts to mess with the shape. But if they're too loose, I'll do it too loose for you, then the legs kind of just dangle around. And that doesn't make it as fun to play with because you want to kind of put them in a position to have it stay there. So I like to do a nice medium tightness so that it's not squishing back here, but it's still tight enough that if you move it, the leg stays where you want it. When you get to that tightness level, you'll go ahead and tie another couple knots. Because they're kids' toys, I always just tie like a lot of knots. And now that that's knotted, you're gonna go ahead and sink your thread. So to do that, you kind of pull the leg behind, and since the knot's right there, you just want to put the thread in right by where it came out, and then bring it up wherever it comes out, it doesn't matter. And you'll cut it right where you brought it up. And then, so there's the tail, and you just let that go right into the fabric. And that allows you to totally hide your tails. And I'm going to go ahead and do that same thing with this tail too. All right, we've got our dino. She's got her arms and legs on. They move, which is great. All we got to do is put on the eyes. And I really like to take a minute and just decide where I want the eyes, because the eyes are the entire personality of this little guy. So, or girl, I guess in this case. So I like to just kind of decide. On the T-Rex, I usually like the eyes instead of, I know usually we put the eyes kind of forward because that's what we think of, but on this one, this pattern, I like them a little farther back. Probably about right there. So I guess it kind of lines up, if you want a reference, the crook of the neck right there rounds, and if you take that line up, that's kind of the edge, so you kind of want it behind that line. It's kind of a good way to remember. And I like to use these shank buttons that have the eye, I'm trying to get it in focus for you. There we go. On the back, so you don't go up and through like these buttons, you go in the back to sew them on. Those make great eyes, and they're really easy to find in pretty much any sewing store's button section. And instead of sewing on one eye than the other, that kind of makes them so they dangle a little bit. I like them to be nice and tight. So I sew both eyes at the same time like this. So I know I want it right here, which means I want it the same place on the other side. So I try to get my fingers about where I want the buttons. And then I take my knotted doubled thread and I pass it through. And you just try to get it even and you pull it tight. Oh, and my knot is not big enough. Also, if you're worried about your thread breaking, the eyes coming off, you can go ahead and try dental floss to sew on your eyes with. Sometimes that people find that's a little stronger and doesn't break as much because of the wax coating, I guess. All right, so I've got my thread through. The knot is on this side, and the thread's coming out that side. I'm going to put that there so it stops falling down. I'm going to thread my eye, and I'm going to go back through right next to where my thread went through before, and right next to where the knot is on this side, and I'm going to pull it tight. And then I'm going to do that on this eye, and I'm going to pull it through again. And you'll see, because we sewed them on at the same time, instead of like being dangly like this, that's kind of what it would be like if you sewed them on together. This way you can pull it tight, and it kind of gives it almost like a little hollow of an eye. So that's what I like. I'm not going to pull it tight quite yet because I like to go through the eyes quite a few times to make sure this is nice and strong. So I'm going to just go through a couple more times. Okay, I've gone through, I don't even know, I didn't even count, a lot of times. And I've got them nice and tight. You can kind of see it's kind of going in to the head a little bit. And I'm gonna just tie the knot right behind the eye. And that's how I'm gonna do that. I'll take my thread, hold it like that, make a loop, and put my needle through, and then pull it tight. And I'm gonna do that a few times. I've triple knotted it. My eyes are sewn on nice and tight with doubled thread, and I've gone through quite a few times so they're nice and sturdy. And now I'm gonna just go ahead and sink my thread so I don't have a tail. And then I will trim it off. And there we go. An adorable little pink dinosaur.